welcome to the Data for Subscriptions podcast, where we explore how to run better subscription businesses and what that takes. I'm your host, Berat Banyan, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Florian, CEO of a P2S Management Consulting firm, to the show. Welcome, Florian.
Hi, Berat. Thank you.
So today we're going to speak about how to get started with as-a-service businesses in B2B hardware industry. Before we jump into the topic, for anybody who has joined this live event, you can ask your questions and add them as comments in whichever platform that you choose to participate via. We'll make sure to pick up any other questions during or at the end of the show. So with that said, let's jump into the topic. But I would love for you, Florian, to just give us a bit of an introduction about yourself first. What led you to where you are now leading and heading P2S?
Oh, big question. Where to start? Well, yeah, I'm Florian. I'm half German, half French, living in Brussels, so a little bit of everything and nothing at the same time. Where did my journey start? It started back at university, in fact. 6 years ago, when I studied, I participated in quite some consulting projects. One of them was in the logistics industry, and we were tasked to research what are business models that are sustainable on one side, but also profitable on the other side. And this is where I came across these subscription and as a service business models. And I was fascinated by these topics and decided to write my master thesis about subscription models in the manufacturing industry, and more specifically focusing on what are the challenges to overcome when you want to develop your own subscription business model? So challenges related to the financing structure, the pricing mechanism, the clauses that need to figure in the contract, the compensation model for your salespeople, etc. And so what was very interesting is to see all those challenges and how some of the leading companies such as Rolls-Royce, Atlas Copco, Signify, Xerox, Hilti have mastered their transformation journey, and to learn from their best practices, learn from their to-dos and not to-dos also on how to structure such a transformation journey. And this then led to the birth, let's say, of P2S standing for products to subscriptions. And what do we do at P2S? We help manufacturers out there of physical pieces of equipment, of machines. We help them innovate on their business model away from this transactional product sales business model towards a recurring revenue, recurring subscription business model. So this is our mission at P2S.
Gotcha. We want to speak as a service today. It's been a topic for more than 10 years, as far as I can recall. But we see an acceleration when it comes to as a service businesses today. What has changed? Why is that from your perspective, Florian?
Yeah, it's a very interesting one. That I think we definitely see an acceleration in the adoption and the development of as a service and subscription-based business models in, let's say, the manufacturing, the physical world out there. I think the main reasons are, we can look at it from a manufacturer point of view and from a customer point of view. If we look at the manufacturer point of view, I think the revenue stability aspect is very, very interesting to them. But I think the big change in why we see traction nowadays is mostly due to the advancement in technologies, whether this is the IoT technologies or the IT infrastructures behind it. So more and more pieces of equipment are connected, which means a lot of data is being gathered, which can be used and which are, let's say, useful for subscription-like business models. And then a third point on the manufacturer side is that it gives them competitive advantage. In, let's say, Western manufacturers, how to stay, let's say, ahead and one way is to not innovate even more on the physical products itself, but innovate on how you bring value to your customers, and so on working on your business model itself. These are points from a manufacturer point of view, but looking at a customer side, because of course, well, if customers don't buy into the solution, then there is no fit, right? So there is also an increase of appetite, let's say, for more flexibility, especially in these uncertain times with all the crises we're going through in the past, let's say, 4 to 5 years. and those as a service models just provide more flexibility, more peace of mind, provide outsourced operational risks from a customer point of view towards the manufacturer. And then of course there's the big part about the lower barriers to entry in terms of the capex costs, which are usually not there in as a service model. So I think these reasons, both from a manufacturer point of view and from a customer point of view, are driving factors for the rising success and appetite and curiosity into as a service models in the physical product world.
Why don't we look at some of these specific pockets that you are seeing now more movement versus others? I know one of the spaces you're pretty active in is the energy sector. And we start talking first about what is the primary driver when we look at the energy sector, and then be very specific about what pockets we're speaking about, what type of companies even.
Yeah, the energy sector is definitely very interesting, and why the as a service models work so well is thanks to the energy efficiency gains that these newer pieces of equipment bring to the table. It just makes sense to subscribe to a long-term, let's say, plan contract where energy efficiency is being managed from a provider point of view for the customer. And there's plenty of different industries. I mean, the HVAC industry, so heating, ventilation, air conditioning, cooling equipment as well, are great examples. There's a company, Energy Partners, based in South Africa, which are doing very well with cooling as a service, and so it's great to see that in different regions in the world as a service models are thriving. But looking also at here in Europe, Signify, so Philips in 2016, when they did the split of Philips into, say, the healthcare part and the lighting part, Signify, the light as a service model works very well, and so it works. Why? Because the new LED lighting have much more energy efficiency compared to traditional lamps, and so the energy efficiency part plays a crucial role in as a service model, or let's say a multiplying and accelerating factor. Plus, you don't have to invest any capital upfront. So in many cases, it's just a no-brainer for customers to buy into such an as a service contract.
It's interesting when you mentioned HVAC, like heating and cooling. We know, for example, one of the situations that occurred with the pandemic was that in Europe, at least, it was quite clear that there was significant issues with how to solve for heating. Off the back of that, we actually see from our vantage point as well, companies that are providing solutions, not necessarily driven by as a service. It's actually not at all the question here. The primary issue is, how do we solve for heating for consumers, people, or even small businesses? Then you're looking at solutions or products that are quite expensive. And one of the ways to mitigate for that is that you can solve for the upfront investment by then providing an as a service model instead.
Yeah.
But what I
Yes.
think is, from that, what I think also is another angle that expands on it is, you have customers in more, let's say, developed parts of the European Union, where they're more looking for an outcome. So they're not so much interested in looking at a specific cooling or heating system. More so, they want an outcome, which could be like, I want to have a certain degree in my house, and they're willing to pay for that certain degree in my house. Is that something that you see, and you maybe even have projects that you've been working on similar initiatives?
100%. I mean, makes me think about a project that we worked on in the ventilation industry. So it was not even with a manufacturer, but with a distributor of ventilation equipment. And what was very interesting, the first thing that we do every time we do a project is we go out to their clients to ask them about kind of what are the pain points that they experience, what do they want, what do they suggest to be improved. So kind of give them the pen, let's say, of how their ideal solution would be looking like. And I mean, if we're being completely honest with ourselves, no one cares about the ventilation system itself, right? What we want is we want clean air. We want to breathe clean air. We want to have to just be in pleasant climate, let's say. And so what was very interesting is the value proposition completely changes from we ship boxes and we sell a ventilation system to you, and then we're going to be very happy because we're going to sell you a filter afterwards in 6 months' time, towards, hey guys, we're going to guarantee you a pleasant air quality. And so there the value proposition was that 95% of the time the air quality stays below 900 ppm, which is, let's say, the CO2, the particles level in the air, which is a proxy for the air quality. So I think what's very interesting is you go away from this, you sell something that is important to you as a manufacturer, the ventilation system itself, towards you sell what your customers actually want. So you go towards those outcome-based models. And what I think the most beautiful and fascinating thing about as a service in these subscription-based models is this change in incentives. Because when you sell something in a traditional way, well, believe it or not, you're going to be incentivized that the product don't last that long, and you want to resell something in the shortest period possible, probably. And so the incentives just are not that healthy, I would say. Whereas when you look at an as a service model, well, every maintenance intervention is not anymore a revenue driver, but it becomes a cost factor. So you're more incentivized to have a product, a machine that is working constantly over time, and to have as little interventions and the best interventions possible, rather than having a product that lasts as long as possible, which is perfectly in line also with our sustainability obligations as citizens of the world. So it just makes purely sense. And once customers start understanding that this is just a business model of the future that just makes sense, not in all cases, of course, but in some cases, I think this is where kind of the click happens.
And this is no small point. I'd even admit to it that when we have bought appliances to our own home, one of the latest devices was through a subscription. And that model has completely shifted, because if you take some of the appliances for home, they have unfortunately been built according to the description that you made, that you might have to buy a new one within 5 to 8 or 10 years, whatever it might be. Unfortunately, on the lower range, even by some experts claim. Now, with the subscription model, the manufacturer has a totally different incentive. And it's again driven by economics, but there's nothing wrong with it. But it actually means that you get a product that works and lasts longer. It provides a higher lifetime value for the provider. And as a customer, we were at least very attracted by the fact that we can have a product that lasts longer, which also does, aside from doing the job, it also is good for the environment, of course. So that's a great point. I want to move on to, and I know you work in many different pockets, and there's so many exciting cases that I want to kind of get out from you during our conversation. So the injection molding industry is one other space that I know you work with. I'm not sure everybody knows even what injection molding is specifically. So why don't you just explain quickly what it is, and what shifts have you seen in this area?
Yeah, the injection molding industry is very interesting. Perhaps just before going into injection molding, I just wanted to make a point about the different types of as a service models, because when one thinks about as a service models, they either think about software as a service, or they think about the pure equipment as a service, the complete machine as a service. But there's a lot of in-betweens, in fact, and we see, let's say, 4 major categories. There's equipment as a service, there's software as a service, but there's also in-betweens, one of them being components as a service, or also consumables as a service. So these are 4 things. And of course, if we take now injection molding, where, for instance, plastic bottles are being produced. So it's the mechanism of producing a bottle, so pouring some material into a machine, which then produces something that comes out of it, which can have a lot of different forms, materials, etc. And what is very interesting is the as a service model that we've seen there is not necessarily the one that works best for the complete injection molding machines, which is hundreds of thousands of euros or even millions, but it's more for just a component within that complete injection molding machine. So the heart piece, let's say, that does the magic, it turns out that subscription models as a service models are working better for this part, which is the one that has the most tear and wear and needs to be switched out from time to time, rather than the big piece of equipment that stays there for 15, 20, 25 or even more years. So I think it's very interesting for the people that listen to us, if when they go into their own company and think about, okay, how do as a service models could look for us, don't only think about the pure equipment as a service model. Also think about components, also think about consumables. Makes me think about another case, sandblasting equipment, for instance. Also a very, very interesting one, where the majority of the value being generated from a provider point of view comes from the abrasive. So let's say the sand, the rock that you put into the sandblasting machine. And so there it's more of a razor and blade model, let's say, where you give away for free the machine, the sandblasting equipment, and then you charge based on the consumables, the abrasives, the sand that has been used. Why is this interesting from a provider point of view? Well, it turns out that in this industry, they buy the sandblasting equipment from the premium manufacturer, but they're going to use the abrasives from low-cost providers, let's say. And so this is one way to control, let's say, more of the value chain from a provider point of view. So to have a certain positive, let's say, lock-in effect.
What I think is interesting is that these examples that we've looked at, initially when we started to chat, you said as a service not only allows necessarily for you to innovate around the product, but it also allows you to innovate around your business model and how you offer. In the examples that you gave, I don't want to in any way take away from product innovation in the sandblasting industry, but you could argue that maybe as a product, it's kind of at the edge of what it is and what it can do. But then when you can still work with as a companies and you can provide in a different way. What I also find interesting with the as a service model is that it really knows no boundaries. We could exemplify heavy excavators that are used in mining, where instead of buying these almost dinosaur size trucks and excavators, you can subscribe and you can pay for tonnage.
Yes.
So the amount of rock that you take out from mines and you pay for that and don't care about anything else. There is some form of a service level agreement on what you want to have in place. So here we're speaking massive industries, massive budgets and revenue for companies, all the way down to perhaps smaller cases like the heating for maybe homes. And it's really, really interesting. But we can, as I said, we can go through more, but in fact, there's another side to this, because not every situation and every industry is a success story in terms of as a service. And I want us to be candid and talk about, from your experience, what are the situations you see where as a service models are struggling or simply is facing a backlash? It's actually not appropriate.
Yes, I mean, there's three things that come to my mind, why as a service model sometimes fail on the market. One of them being unclear value proposition. The other is there's the TCO, so the total cost of ownership is unclear, is not transparent. Customers don't calculate it in a proper way, so there's no comparison. And the third point, which is a very important one, is customers are just not used to purchasing as a service. It's in the procurement department, you don't know how to account for an as a service, let's say, offer, and then you stick to, well, we're used to doing capex, so please do a capex offer. So what I meant, coming back to the first point, the unclear value proposition, Makes me think of a case we worked on. So in the compressor business, let's say, the compressor business, there was a company that had so many different offerings. So there was a rental, a short-term rental, there was a long-term rental, they had a lease which they offered for the piece of equipment, they had a capex, a traditional capital expenditure model, and they had an as-a-service model. The thing is, so they had, for the same piece of equipment, they have had 5 different ways to offer it to their customers. The issue was there were so many overlaps, and so it was once confusing for the customers, but also confusing for the sales representatives to pitch the nuances of the different offerings to their customers. So I think when you're getting started with as a service models, try to make sure that you don't have too many internally competing offers, so that it's crystal clear what the differences between as a service and capex are, and that perhaps there is not 10 variations in between of different rental and leasing mechanisms. So this is on the value proposition, for me, needs to be crystal clear. The second point was on the total cost of ownership. The fights, let's say, start between providers and customers when you discuss about what should be included in the total cost of ownership calculations and what should not be included, and especially of who you talk to, because an operational manager might have different incentives than the finance manager versus the inspection quality person that works within a company. So I think it's very important to be crystal clear on the total cost of ownership calculations. What we always do with our clients is, instead of letting the end customer do their calculations on their own, you do the calculations on their behalf. I think Signify is a very good example how they do the light as a service offerings, where they first do an analysis of the current situation with energy prices, how much it costs, with how many lumen are necessary, so the brightness, let's say, level are necessary, and then they prepare an offer and they make it black and white on kind of how much are you going to save with the as a service offer versus the traditional capex offer. And then it's easy to compare for customers. So this was the second point on total cost of ownership. And then the third point about the procurement or the purchasing of as a service offerings, there is a huge deal of work which needs to be done on helping customers on their procurement process, because on their side, as I said, in most cases, they have a capex budget, they have an opex budget, and they cannot just simply take from one budget to another. Sometimes it's different teams that are responsible for them. So you really need to, and sometimes not sit with the procurement department, but to go directly to the CEOs and CFOs of a given customer to discuss these new as a service offerings. And I think most importantly, to make them understand and to explain the added value that comes from switching the incentives. And for me, this is the most important factor is in as a service models, you're fundamentally changing the way you do business and fundamentally changing the incentives. And the old-fashioned incentives are not true in an as a service business model.
Florian, let's go through the different phases of the as-a-service business transformation. And what I would like to do is that we approach it almost like a guide or a playbook when we have this discussion, so we can make it extremely practical off the back of course, the success scenarios that you shared and how to avoid some of the situations where we fail. What is the first phase?
I think the first phase, when a company, a manufacturer wants to start thinking about subscriptions, the first step would be to read about what exists out there. Then it would be to talk internally with your colleagues about how would they envision an as a service model. And I think what's probably, if you ask 5 colleagues within a company, you will get at least 5, if not more, different answers of how they envision an as a service solution. So as a service really has no limits, no boundaries from an imagination point of view, let's say. And then I think what's very important is to start going out to your customers as quickly as possible, and to not have this, let's say, traditional manufacturing approach where you think, okay, we know best what our customers want. Let's lock ourselves in for 6 months and let's prepare an amazing value proposition to our customers and then cross fingers and hope for the best that it's going to sell. We would be always going the complete opposite approach. So first thing is go out to your customers, question them about what they like about your offerings, what they don't like about your offerings, what could be improved, and work on those improvement areas and how as a service models could help alleviate those pains of customers. And then based on that, you take this feedback, you draw a value proposition, you draw a term sheet. It's a simple 2-page document, no need for any fancy PowerPoints, final offers. Go out, take a term sheet with how would the financing look like, how would the payment look like, how would the risks look like, what are contractual clauses that would be included, what would be the duration of it. So really prepare a 2-page term sheet on what would be the value proposition towards end customers, confront those those customers with it that you previously talked to, and they opened up their heart about their pain points. Go out to them again, show them your as a service idea, and don't work on only one. You can work on 2, 3, 4 simultaneously, and ask them what they like best. And so you have certain feedback loops there on really co-conceptualizing your as a service offering together with your customers. I think this is the crucial thing, and this is what we do with all our clients, what we call the chapter 1, which is co-conceptualizing and finding a concept market fit, a subscription value market fit of your own subscription models in plural, because there can be several ones.
Gotcha. So with that in place, we have a concept market fit or product market fit. What's the next step? So what do we do tomorrow, basically? How do we start building this?
So I think once you've found the concept market fit, once you've done the calculations internally about, okay, how big is the market, what there are going to be the returns of the project, etc., then only then you would move to the building the actual offering phase. And kind of this building actual offering, we always start with, let's say, the IT and the IoT infrastructure behind it, because these are usually things that take a lot of time to, let's say, make sure to figure out what you want to do with all the data that you are collecting or could be collecting via as a service models, to make sure that you have the appropriate IT infrastructure to, let's say, structure the whole monetization also. And I think here also the link to you guys at DigitalRoute that do a fantastic job there. And so the IT infrastructure is one big block. Then there's another big block which is working on your bundling and pricing. So what are the actual offers, the packages that you're going to develop and present to your customers with the actual price points, so creating a calculator behind it. Then you would also be working on the financing structure that exists, and the insurance mechanism, so how to manage the risks, and then of course the legal documents. So what are contractual documents that are needed? But all those things are very internally focused again. So the first phase is really to go out to your customers and find a concept market fit. The second phase is very much oriented, okay, internally now we need to get ready and we need to build, operationally speaking, our offering. So this is what we would do in the second chapter.
Gotcha. I think from our experience, Florian, I'm happy to hear that you said that you guys look at the IT infrastructure and IoT, and furthermore into figuring out, at least have a plan for the data that we capture and what to do with that data you refer to as data monetization. I want to actually play this back, is because, again, keeping it candid, I think a lot of speakers in the market, it's appealing to say, start small, start in a corner, get going, test your way forward. I think it's a fair advice, but I don't think necessarily in reality it really holds water. And I'll explain why, and I'd love for you to challenge it if you don't agree. If you're a startup, of course, go ahead and do. But the audience that you refer to, many of them have been in business for a while. You're already selling something, especially if you're in B2B manufacturing. You've been around. Some of the challenges you will face is you're selling, for example, products in multiple ways. you have service contracts on top of them. You're thinking, I'm going to send another proposal. I want to offer my services, my products in another way. You're probably offering that to the same customer base. Now, for those in the know, you would immediately understand that starts to create a problem. And then you're supposed to make sure that you manage the different terms, the entitlements. You want to make sure that you understand and learn from the customer's usage. That speaks data. And we're not even discussing the angle that you chose when it comes to the IoT sensors and the data. How do we capture those and what do we do with them? It is for this reason that I often come across companies, that even large companies, that start small with this advice, starts to go into let's just manually manage the data, and quite immediately find themselves in a problematic state, which then hinders their ability to drive that as a service growth, as the goal typically is. Do you see that at all? And do you agree or disagree with that analysis?
Yes, I think very rapidly customers will hit the limits of, let's say, their internal IT systems that they see. We do see, however, that usually they do start with doing things manually, but the good things is they realize quite quickly that, let's say, more structure needs to be put in place. This is definitely something that we see out there on the market. But ideally, you want from the get go design it in a flexible way that you're not stuck with within your world, your IT infrastructure, let's say. And I think this is also something very important what we do in the second chapter, which I didn't mention. When we build a subscription offering together with the clients, is we put them in contact with the right ecosystem partners. And what I mean by that is we have researched what are all the companies that are active in, let's say, the subscription world. So whether this is subscription management softwares, whether this is financing providers that can finance the pieces of equipment on a pay-per-use basis, this is insurance providers, this is companies that help on the sustainability aspects. These are companies that are helping on how to handle the data flows and the monetization parts of it. And so we've built an ecosystem where there's more than 30 companies in it, which are useful on the transformation phase. And so what we do is we put our clients in contact with those organizations that can then take a step, take a building block within the bigger project. But I think in order to move quick, we always advise to partner up with external providers at first, because they just probably know better and quicker how to put something in place, rather than developing everything in-house. But again, depends. There's certain companies that do want to have let's say the hands of and having everything developed in-house.
Of course. But if I summarize this section between the chapter 1 and chapter 2, the main takeaway for me, who wanted a practical guide from you, is one, make sure you have your concept market fit dialed, nailed, meaning understand what your customers' appetite is, have a couple of different models, test and validate, have proper feedback loops. And then in chapter 2, what you refer to is start with the IT infrastructure and IoT, lead that into a data and data management strategy, essentially, all the way down to monetization. And then from there, look into price bundling and as well as contracts. And your last takeaway as well for me is make sure you have the right ecosystem partners in your journey based on, of course, your own desire, how much you want to do in-house versus externally. But generally speaking, you want to make sure that you want to use best practice to the degree that you can. Okay. What are the expected timeframes for an as a service transformation? And for this to be meaningful, I think we should really dress it in highly specific context. So we can say a company of such kind with such a product, even if you could be as explicit as talking about one of the cases you've worked with again, or maybe two, and say this is the time frame that it took.
Well, let's say the best student did it in 10 months. So from the idea of developing something towards the first subscription contract that that has been sold in the ventilation industry. So it took their 10 months from the beginning till the end. It very much, I think there's a good correlation between the time it takes and the size of a company. The bigger the company, the more time it takes. Perhaps, yes, they have more resources and just so people to have to work on the actual project, but just size is not necessarily the biggest sprinters, let's say, out there. I think what's very important when doing such an initiative is to give a degree of freedom to the team that innovates on this. Sometimes it can be even a separate business unit or a separate entity that is given their own P&L and a budget to experiment with as a service model. I think that's an important one, because yes, you're going to challenge a bit, well, not a bit, you're going to challenge quite drastically the current way of doing business. So usually a transformation journey, what we say, it takes 9 to 18 months until the first as a service contracts have been sold to the end customers. This is a time frame, let's say, that we see. It can take longer. In certain cases, depends on how many products you want to move into as a service models as well, because usually, well, a manufacturer has quite some different products, sometimes dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of different products. Which product categories do you want to transition towards as a service? You usually are not going to start with developing everything into an as a service model. So it very much depends also on the geographical areas you want to develop an as a service models in. So, but usually, let's say you could be counting 9 to 18 months in order to have your first as a service deals that are being sold to end customers.
And could you expand as well in terms of where you see a similar time frame from the first contracts to how you typically see scaling and growth really take off? Do you have a view on that too?
Yes. So just to mention, at P2S, we focus mostly on how to get from 0 to 1. So you
Right.
don't have an as a service model at the moment towards you have an as a service model, and we help you, of course. And this brings us to the third chapter, which is the go-to-market strategy on how to equip your sales team on how to sell as a service. And so this is where you want to have standardized offerings. You want to train your salespeople how to sell as a service. What are the different personas within a customer that you need to sell to? How do you adapt the pitch, the script, let's say, to different persona types within a customer, and then also on how to prepare for the scaling phase. But on our case, I think focus is key, and we focus on finding your concept market fit, building your offering, making your first successes, and preparing you for the scaling phase. This is what we focus on, but we're not going to work with a company that does already 500 million in annual recurring revenue that wants to scale this even further. I think focus is key here.
From our vantage point, just to chip in on that, it highly depends on, as you were saying, on the 0 to 1 phase, which type of company you are in the sense of what product are you offering, in what space you're offering it. Because if you're offering it in a more regulated space, in less regulated, for example, imagine you do manufacturing for within pharma, and that's highly regulated, then of course it's going to have a different impact than a less regulated space. But your customers play a big role. Are you dealing with large customers who you might, in your traditional business model, have 18 to 24 months of sales cycle? Of course, that plays a big role. That being said, though, even in these cases, your entire approach is that you want to move it to a more rapid cycle of have a continuous kind of a dialogue. You have a different sales go to market with your as a service. So that will shift to a much more rapid one. But what we see is there could be companies where you see scaling effects within 2 to 3 years, but it can also take 4, 5, 6 years. And we haven't even spoken about the market itself, because if you have momentum and tailwind, such as when we spoke about heating and cooling system because of the aforementioned pandemic situation, that helps versus other industries. But since we're giving some ballpark in terms of what we see in our experience, that's what I would typically say.
Perhaps just something to share also. What you mentioned before is there are certain legacy manufacturers out there that have been selling one piece of equipment for decades, and so their customers know, okay, the product is working in that particular way, so why change towards an as a service model? And I think the as a service models, we see it usually it's initiatives, for instance, for new product launches or for specific product categories within a company, but not necessarily for the flagship product that has been around for 30 years. And just if everything is working fine as it is, don't touch it. You don't want to enforce as a service if there is no request for as a service. I think this is very important. And also there's this, I mean, in the B2C, in our private lives, we have this subscription fatigue point, right? Where any additional subscription is just, another subscription, right? So we don't want to go towards, you don't want to push too hard for subscriptions if there is no case for as a service models.
That's an excellent point. I do think that when it comes to B2B, for many reasons, because it's not as fast moving as, for example, the consumer industry and what, for example, the media and content industry, where this whole subscription fatigue was first mentioned. We know that again as well, actually was raised during the pandemic period because of just for reasons of people being at home, maybe realizing that why am I having 10 different subscriptions and what am I really paying for? You mentioned something important in the beginning of our discussion that applies regardless of what type of customer that you're dealing with, be it the end consumer, you're speaking content and media, or you're speaking heavy manufacturing equipment. You need to get the price value ratio right. You mentioned that you get certain things wrong, such as you don't have a proper total cost of ownership. You exemplified companies that are able to provide this is what it costs you if you go with traditional capex versus if you go with as a service. Then one shouldn't forget that as a service is a means to, it's not necessarily a solution to. If you don't have your value price equation right, it's not going to automatically get fixed by as a service. It just, the problem just shifts to another place. The takeaway that I also wanted to highlight as we were discussing your 0 to 1 approach, and then we spoke how long does it take for scaling, which is when the business really takes off. One perhaps advice to send away in our discussion is many companies wait until, when I reach the point of scale to make sure that I have the right kind of environment competence, the right infrastructure, be it your quote to cash or whatever you want to call it. But one of the mistakes is don't do it too late, because in actuality, what you do is that you push your timeline to reach your growth and scaling point further down the road because of the inefficiencies that you have. This is just one learning that we see again with many of the customers that we work with. But on that note, you've shared a lot of good tips with us today in terms of how to get it right. May I ask you, what are the things, big picture again, between technology, data management, IT, price bundling, what are the 2, 3 things that you see companies typically struggle with when they want to get into launching as a service?
For me, the most important one is finding the concept market fit that customers buy into. This is really the hardest part, because once your customers say yes, then all the rest, let's say you're going to figure it out rather quickly. I think whether this is the IT infrastructure, whether this is the financing part. And what we get a lot is questions about the financing part itself, and so they only see all the, let's say, potential problems or questions they could be asking. Well, the manufacturer could be asking themselves, but also the customers. I think the most important thing is finding first a value proposition that is appealing, and it comes down to the total cost of ownership in most cases for as a service model. As a service model, as you said, but that is not the end in itself, is not a goal in itself. It's a mean towards an interesting offering on the market. And the total cost of ownership, and the good thing with manufacturing companies, with the B2B environment, it's rational thinking, right? So it's numbers based. So you need to show black and white, okay, this you're going to save that much, whether this is time, energy, money, whatever. But you need to be able to show what are the numbered benefits that you're going to bring as a provider to your customers, and then it becomes a no-brainer. But first, it's about finding that one before thinking about. Of course, the IT infrastructure is super important, and you should make sure that when you start it, the foundations are there, so that you can build your house in a proper way. But start with the end in mind, which is a successful offering for your customers, and then of course IT infrastructure, finding the right partners, as I mentioned, and collaborating with them, whether this is IT partners, whether this is IoT partners, financing providers. There's many financing experts that can help on how to exactly account for it in your books, with the different IFRS also standards that need to be applied or not applied. So all this information is there. Let's say we have it partly in-house, partly with the ecosystem partners. But start with your customers need to buy in your as a service idea first.
Gotcha. As a final question to you, Florian, before we wrap this session up, if you look ahead the next 12 to 24 months, 1 to 2 years, what really excites you? What do you see is coming down the near road ahead?
Oof, that's a tough one. There's what excites me. There's many interesting projects. Let's say there is a project I started aside, because let's say consulting is nice, but we always have this more entrepreneurial, let's say, approach with all our clients, where it's always based on performance figures, let's say. So more having this on a to transform, let's say, not offer consulting services, but to see it more as let's say corporate venturing, where you innovate together towards having a successful as a service model out there. Again, I think it comes back to incentives, right? We should all be incentivized that the best solution is being developed together with our clients. So this is a space where I want to move even stronger, let's say, into that direction for P2S. I think focus is key. So we decided to focus on the physical products world, so the manufacturing world, but it's quite huge. So we work with medical device manufacturers, we work with ventilation, cooling equipment, inspection systems, drive trains, injection molding machines, sandblasting equipment, industrial cookers. So there's so many different applications, and I think the beautiful thing is all those best practices of what to do and what not to do, what mistakes to avoid in order to be quicker to develop your own as a service models. Well, there's so many similarities that can be taken, and then perhaps also to share another point is equipment as a service is sometimes quite challenging, and the first step, if you don't have any recurring revenue as a manufacturer, is probably going to be software as a service, because this is, let's say, a easier to buy in, easier to develop offering than a pure equipment as a service offering. And it gives you already this way of thinking, this okay, we sell outcomes, we don't sell tangible products anymore. And so this, if you are a manufacturer, if you have a software out there which you're used to giving out for free, or which you're not monetizing on a software as a service basis yet, this, what we see is it's quite successful to start with a software as a service project first, before going into a pure equipment as a service, which is kind of the cherry on the cake, let's say.
Florian, thank you very much for today's conversation. I greatly appreciate it. And thank you also to everybody tuning in for this session.
Thank you, but that was very nice discussion, interesting. Thank you to everyone that attended as well. And if you're interested to learn more, I'm happy to have a conversation and to just figure out how different as a service subscription models could be applied to your particular business. Thank you,
Great.
Bedat.
See you next time, guys.